Hello, everyone. My name is Edie Stringfellow, and I'm the Senior Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion with the Massachusetts Biotechnology Council. Thank you for joining us today for MassBio's Make Shift Happen, where we discuss anything and everything related to equity, diversity, inclusion, and engagement. I will also like to thank our partner, Coriolis Pharma, for powering today's program. I would like to go over the ground rules with you. For the first half of the program, it will be the Q&A portion between me and the guest, but also please don't hesitate to add questions or comments to the chat section. We want the program to be interactive and very engaging. So for the bottom part and a half of the program, we'll go over the questions that's being asked by the audience. The program wraps up about 2:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it's a hard stop at 2:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now let's get started. While recent client trials of innovative new therapies show incredible promise for patients who have faced a lifetime of unmet medical needs, the biggest challenge for these therapies is yet to come, and that is ensuring equitable access. A critical moment for this issue could be the development of new therapies for sickle cell disease. It affects approximately 1 in 365 Black Americans. What can this do to ensure that all patients have access to what could be life-changing? Our esteemed panelists from gene therapy sector and patient advocacy space will discuss the current state of ED&I in a therapeutic development, take a patient-centric approach to developing new gene therapies, and challenges and opportunities for improving therapeutic accessibility. Joining me today, discussions is Dr. Bree, founding director of the New England Sickle Cell Disease Institute, Sarah Johnson Davis, senior director of patient advocacy and state government affairs, and also Adrian Shapiro, founder and scientific administrator of the Access Foundation. Adrian, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, so I am 5th generation of mothers in my family to have a child with sickle cell. And I'm the little sister to my brother, Teddy, who, my elder brother, who passed away from sickle cell. So I have lived with sickle cell my entire life. And my mom always said, you know, God was good, but science was going to fix it. And so when science got to the point where it looked like it was going to fix it, I quit my job and founded Access Advocacy with an emphasis on stem cell research. And what we do is we apply a systems approach to advocacy, education, and training, right, to our community so that when the cure is here, when the cure gets here, there are going to be more of us that can get it. And that's what we do.
And I'm grateful to have you here today. And Sarah, please tell us a little about yourself and what it is that you do.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Edie and MassBio. My name is Sarah Johnson Davis. I'm the Senior Director of Patient Advocacy and State Government Affairs at CRISPR Therapeutics. Just to give some background, I joined CRISPR in December of 2018. Prior to working at CRISPR, I worked at Novartis for many years. Most of my time was in state government affairs. And at the end of my career at Novartis, I was in patient advocacy. So it's a pleasure to be here and with the panel.
Thank you. Also, I'm grateful for everything that you and CRISPR Therapeutics are doing. And so as a community of a lot of families that are suffering with sickle cell disease. Dr. Bree, let's start. If you could first tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I am a hematologist oncologist. I founded a new center specifically for the care of adults living with sickle cell disease. I'm at the University of Connecticut, and we have a catchment area that expands across New England. So that's why we were bold enough to call it the New England Sickle Cell Institute. We have over 300 adults who we care for, in addition to providing medical care and preventative care. We also have a robust clinical trial portfolio. So our individuals living with sickle cell disease have access to clinical trial participation and potentially being one of the subjects on a clinical trial that may lead to approval one day. So really exciting. And I'm happy to be here, Mass Bio. Thank you, Edie. And always a pleasure to be on a panel with Sarah Davis and Adrian.
I could not have asked for a more awesome panel today. And Bree, if you don't mind me continuing with you, if for those who aren't as familiar with gene therapies, would you mind taking a couple of minutes to provide a brief overview and the relevance of this technology to the treatment of sickle cell disease?
Sure, I'll try to do that for a broad audience. So just as a reminder, many of you out there in the audience might remember high school biology and learning about hereditary diseases that are passed from parent to child. And sickle cell disease is one of the diseases that I think most of us learned about in biology. And sickle cell disease arises in an individual if both parents carry sickle cell trait or another type of hemoglobin trait that can give rise to sickle cell disease. And just as an example, if two parents carry sickle cell trait, 1 in every 4 of their children is at risk for sickle cell disease, or on average, 1 out of 4 children will have sickle cell disease. It's a lifelong illness. And it's progressive over time. With modern medicine, people are living longer and longer in the United States. It's almost universally expected that a child born with sickle cell disease will live well into adulthood. And I will tell you that I have individuals in my program that are in their 60s and 70s. So we've come a long way. But the average person with sickle cell disease does pass away somewhere in their 40s. And that means that we have a lot of work to do. And one of the areas that's being investigated now is a curative approach called gene therapy. And sickle cell disease really is the perfect illness to study gene therapy in, because it arises because of one simple misspelling in the DNA of that individual, one simple misspelling. And so there are various gene therapy strategies that are being employed right now to try to correct that simple misspelling, like having a spell checker for your health. And just very briefly, there are strategies that are looking to put a new copy of the incorrectly spelled gene into the person's DNA. There are some strategies that are looking to correct that change in spelling directly at the level of that person's DNA. I hope that was a good explanation, but the idea is that you can correct something that's inherited from the parents in the individual and cure the disease.
That's incredible. So that means if this is successful, that person who's cured no longer passes on the disease?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that. No, because their reproductive organs aren't changed by this technology.
Okay.
But they themselves hopefully will be cured of the disease.
Wow. Very interesting. Sarah, Bree has given us a great perspective on this therapeutic development. But how is CRISPR employing an inclusive patient-centric approach to its therapy development?
That's a great question, Edie. So for the sickle cell community, their mantra is nothing for us without us. So it's not just a simple strategy that if we build it, they will come. Instead, I think what we need to do is really focus on meeting the community where they are, so that we go on the journey to drug development together. And that's kind of been at the core of what we've done at CRISPR Therapeutics. We start by listening and learning from that community that lives with the disease. So we've done a number of different approaches to do that. So one of the examples that I'll give is that we've done faith-based outreach, and the purpose being to go into that community, to have the organizations that are in state associations for sickle cell disease participate and educate the community about sickle cell, and also talk about the new treatments that are available. It's been really effective, particularly in this virtual environment since COVID-19, so that the reach is broad. And we also employ a legislative component to that. So we will have a member of the state legislature, which is usually a Black caucus member, attend as well.
Mhm.
So always educating. We've supported disease awareness initiatives at historically Black colleges. We sponsored Howard University's September Sickle Cell Awareness Initiative, and we've done state proclamations as well in the states across the country. But I think what I really wanted to show also is that it's a two-way street. So we've educated CRISPR employees by bringing the patients into CRISPR to share their story and burden of disease. And this has really helped inspire our researchers and scientists, so that it really is education on both sides. So those are some of the examples of what we've done.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And everything that you've done, families like mine, others suffering from sickle cell disease have benefited from it. So I'd like to pivot to Adrian and ask, first and foremost, being a mom to someone living with sickle cell disease and working with Access Advocacy, I'm quite sure that you interact with the patient advocacy teams that Sarah talks about at the life science companies. How does your team at Access Advocacy build bridges between the SCD communities and search of novel treatments and industry who is at the cutting edge of these new discoveries?
Well, I have to say this, when my brother was sick and I was with my mom and we would go into the doctor's office, there would just be my mom and my brother and and the doctor. There was never anybody else there with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
This relationship between, let's say, a CRISPR and myself and my daughter and our community is amazing. We are given parity, meaning that when they bring us in to speak, we actually affect the decisions that are being made. And I don't know if other people can understand this, that what this really means, right? It means for the first time, we, a community that's been pretty reactionary when it comes to our healthcare, being seen as partners, being in rooms where people who really listen to us, really help us. They don't say, we're going to help you. As Sarah said, they help us understand what legislative action was. At one point, I thought all we need to do is make cures. I had no idea that we would have to do all these other things in order to have access to it. So they have really put an investment into helping our community and partnering with us through the education, through the legislation. And I have to say this, because there are many, many who just show up and are there for us in a community where we suffer so much loss. So they're there even with those sorts of events. And I know how hard it is. I know how much they really are in to help us and feel a part of our families.
That's it's an incredible story. And Bree, I'm almost speechless right now. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges to ensuring diversity in clinical trials so that those who need it most have access to these cutting edge medical technologies?
Were you asking me? I'm sorry.
Yes, Bree.
Okay. Well, I think there's two parts to that question. How do we ensure that there's diversity, equity, and inclusion in people getting access to clinical trials, including gene therapy trials? And then how do we make sure that there's access to novel treatments once they're approved? Those are two big questions. Some overlap, but not entirely. So, when you think about therapy such as gene therapy, which is highly specialized and has to be performed in specialized centers, and currently they're performed across the country, but not in every state. So not every person right now with sickle cell disease who wants to participate in a gene therapy clinical trial can do that in their own backyard.
Mhm.
And so what I'm happy to see that the companies that are in this gene therapy space have been working really hard to make sure that individuals who want to take part in clinical trials are able to do so even if it's from a distance. There are processes in place to try to make that possible, including working with community-based organizations like the Sickle Cell Disease Association of America, like Access Advocacy, who are in the local communities that can also serve as a bridge for individuals with sickle cell who want to participate in these studies. But what I think Adrian was also getting at, and Sarah has amazing expertise in this area, is what sorts of legislative and other activities take place now. So when new therapies like gene therapy, which will probably be very expensive, just like any new therapy nowadays, and may not be in every state and every hospital system, how do we make sure that post-approval, the individual with sickle cell disease who can and should benefit potentially has access from a financial standpoint? Now, when you think about gene therapy, it's not just taking a pill every day at home. There's an investment of several months where someone probably has to go to a specialized center to get specialized treatment and specialized monitoring. And how is that going to take place? So these are all the questions that are being answered by fantastic collaborations between biotechnology companies in this space, the sickle cell community, and the clinicians that deliver the care. So these are all fantastic questions that we are addressing and have to continue to address in a multidisciplinary fashion.
Well, you talked about the synergy that we need. They talk about the biotech companies, the sickle cell disease communities, the clinicians. I'd like to direct this question to Sarah. Seeing that you are with CRISPR Therapeutics, what has the FDA said regarding the role of advocacy teams in enhancing the diversity of clinical trial participants?
So the FDA issued a guidance document, I believe it was November of 2020, that was entitled Enhancing the Diversity of Clinical Trial Populations. So it talks about eligibility criteria, enrollment practices, trial designs. And if I could summarize the message that it was giving, it was basically engage early with the patient community. So meet with those patient groups, with the patient community, those experts like Berie, and get recommendations and suggestions from those folks who have either worked with people that have the disease or are advocating for them, and involve them in your design of your trials, and including protocols, trial protocols. And once you do that, it's almost like you've got the community working with you. So the FDA now is utilizing patient organizations and a lot of their feedback as well. So, I mean, when I think about historically, because I've been in the industry a long time, and what patient advocacy was a long time ago, which was sometimes transactional, today it's very much more than that. It's about building authentic relationships and having the patients at the table. So that's my comment.
It is a great comment. And talking about having everyone involved and everyone at the table, Adrian, what are the questions, if you were at the table talking to some of the organizations and the members, or what are the questions or the main concerns of those from the sickle cell disease community that we could better address as an industry?
Well, so I'm going to start. First of all, we have to say that this is so personal because, of course, they're dealing with our bodies, our tissues. So it's very different than historical development has been. So I believe that, well, I know we have so many questions about what things mean, all right? Because it's all so new. So in terms of things like informed consent, being very clear about that, changing informed consent based on our feedback, understanding our community, being transparent about that, coming out and saying, like when things don't work, or even admitting when you don't know, because some of it they really don't know. So we want to know what they know and what they don't know. And when they don't know something, we want to know how they're going to go about finding it. And we want to be right there with them, right? And I think that when we talk about awareness of, how do I put it? When we talk about awareness, we really want them to understand our story. Mm-hmm. We don't come just as, quote unquote, an average patient group. We come with a lot of complexity. And because historically the scientific community has not dealt with us in mass, really. So this is also the first time you've had pretty much in Black Americans where they're really, investing a lot of money and really having to do a deep dive into who we are and our culture and honoring it. And I think as long as we're continuing on this path, we are not put in position where we're just dependent on them, but we are in partnership. And we want to continue feeling that way and seeing that. And I think they're doing a really good job of it. I think this technology, because it is technology, is different in that many of the pharma companies have to share. They're sharing what goes right and they're sharing what goes wrong. And I think it's forcing, I don't even say forcing, I think it's modeling the way that development will need to go. Because once you let us in at the table and understand what we bring, how we help save money, how we help to make things better, because we're all working together, that model is going to continue.
Well, I'm curious, based on what you just said, we talked about informed consent and some of our research and what has worked well and what has not. How would you rank our communications as an industry, such as transparency, clarity, awareness of trials? How would you rank our communication with the SED community? What can we be doing better?
Well, do you really want to know?
Well, we're here.
Don't ask me. Sarah and Bree are going, oh, no. Well, I really think that a couple of things we could be doing better. I think the true understanding of the complexity of the technology and how do you really explain that? And maybe investing a bit more in different ways, modeling through, animation, several different ways of delivering the information, print, video, pictures, mimes, I should say mimes, but that, because it's very, very complicated. How many people really understand their bodies? And it's not just our community. I think the other thing we could do is, if we're talking about trials, how do we get trials into situations or places that aren't major? That's the one thing that kind of breaks my heart, because there are people in other parts of the country where if they're not in a large city or something, that don't have access. So how can we build in things, or using telehealth, our home health workers collection? How can we do that to give other people, a larger base who have access to it? And I think the third thing is really, sometimes I don't know that they do a good enough, how do I put it? I don't know that they brag enough about what it is that they're doing that's different than before. I think it is, I don't think you do a good enough job of explaining why this is different. and how what we're doing now is different than before. And I don't think it's just for the sickle cell community. I think it's for, my work is with rare disease and on all these various boards and things that I'm working on. I don't think you do a good enough job. I think it's one thing to say that I have this technology and it's really cool. And among the geeks, go yay, yay. But I don't think you do a good enough job of explaining what you do, why it costs as much as it does. And really, it's the whole thing about the timeline thing too. I think you guys are all off on that, because you're constantly being asked, when is it, how long? I mean, how long did we go without penicillin? I mean, I just think that you do a bad job about that. So sorry.
No, don't apologize. I mean, that's the reason this program is here, is to make it happen. So
right.
I appreciate your honesty, and I know Sarah does too. Everything we take in, we share with the industry. And at this time, I'm being flagged that we're coming up to the bottom half of the hour, and we're about to open up questions to the audience. But please, that's what we're here for. The only way that we're going to get better at building that bridge of trust and working with the community and getting more patient outcomes to the market faster is by this transparency, this open communications, and working with each other as a community. We have a question here first for Bree. Are there any barriers to diversity and inclusion that are unique to gene therapies?
Barriers to diversity and inclusion. Well, with respect to sickle cell related gene therapies, since the majority of individuals in the US and across the world are of African origin or Latino background, then the diversity issue is actually not a big one, believe it or not, when it comes to sickle cell disease in any therapy, including gene therapy, because most individuals are Black and brown. But with respect to, did you say access to care? Access to the gene therapy clinical trials?
Is the question, I'll read it again. Are there any barriers to diversity and inclusion that are unique to gene therapy? So I would say, what are some of the issues that that prevent or discourage it?
Yeah, so inclusion, I guess. So for someone to withstand the gene therapy protocol, which I'll just briefly tell you, entails chemotherapy, it entails hospitalization for a period of time as the person is recovering from chemotherapy and their immune system is suppressed. And until their body starts to make the new gene, the new healthy gene in appropriate amounts to cure the disease, that means that at baseline, that person has to be fairly healthy. So, almost from day one issue with respect to inclusion is if you have enough complications related to your sickle cell disease, like kidney disease or liver disease or heart disease or lung disease, all these things can happen as someone gets older with sickle cell potentially. It means that you're not a good candidate, safe enough to participate in the clinical trial. So that becomes an exclusion for participation. Other issues are geography. Like you're saying, if you don't live close to a gene therapy clinical trial center, or you don't have a cousin or a sorority sister or whatever in that local area where therapy is taking place, then you may have a hard time. We also have to understand, because of the nature of sickle cell disease and because it can make someone relatively disabled over time, a significant proportion of adults in the United States living with sickle cell disease live at or below the poverty line. Not everyone, but a significant percentage of the population. Or they are the primary breadwinner of their household. So to take off months from work or to leave children at home who you may not have an extended family or network to care for them for you is a major issue in this community. So that also limits inclusion based on your social sort of, where you are socially within society. So those I think are some of the key access issues. Financial is not a big issue now, just because there's no cost to a person participating in a gene therapy clinical trial. So that's not a major issue at this time. I hope I've touched on some of the major points in that question.
Oh my gosh, absolutely you did. I'm learning from you as we're going. Sarah, I'd love to hear you weigh in on this.
So I totally agree with both what Adrian as well as Marie have said. I think the location for clinical trials is key. A lot of times with these more complex procedures and gene therapies, they have to be at centers of excellence, which are not really accessible to maybe the population that the trial is being treated for. When I think about inclusion in general, I think outside of sickle cell, just for rare diseases for which these gene therapies are emerging, I think the patient populations are smaller. So to get a true diverse sample can be challenging for industry. And, once again, I think, we talk about health literacy, we talk about language barriers, cultural differences, geography, all those things are key. I know at CRISPR, what we try to do, to Adrian's point about trying to make a complex technology understandable and resonate with the population, is we've tried to actually, we recently this year just did a new patient page on our website, in which we have infographics and animations that speak to our technology, and we had that information reviewed by the patient population. So we have consultants that look at everything we develop to make sure that they're culturally, they resonate culturally, as well as they make sense. So we're trying to hit all those cylinders, but sometimes it's difficult. Like, for instance, I think one of the barriers to the clinical trial location, I think, is something that's key, that we really have to, I don't know if you try to, Marie, you could probably help with this. Like, not all centers or facilities can perform these types of gene therapies. Would that be accurate? So is it for the trial start, you have to do it at these centers of excellence? It would not be,
or
depending.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a challenge. That's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Now, we're talking about barriers, things that's preventing us from doing it: language, geography, culture. So does this fall under health equity? This is like a new hot button term that we're hearing more frequently. We'll start with you, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind finishing the point where you left off at. What is the role of policymakers and legislation in ensuring health equity, and what can the industry do to help?
Because Adrian spoke on that as well. I mean, I think when you think about the sickle cell population, 70% of that population is on Medicaid, a state Medicaid program.
Right.
So state legislators and policymakers play a big role on access to these new therapies. So I think that, and I am seeing it happen. I know Adrian's done a lot of work and other organizations like Sick Cells and educating the patients about policy and access. Like, how does that happen? Where does it take place? In the state Medicaid P&T committees. So that type of education is happening, and industry is, I believe, helping with that. We know that if we have that patient voice at that table, it resonates way beyond what industry can do. So we want to make sure that we have legislative meetings and we have that patient there as well, talking about the burden of disease and the economic burden. So when you look at one-time treatments over time, what is that economic burden when they're going to the ER? what does that look like in cost when you think of just a one-time treatment, and that will eliminate some of those things. So we worked with the National Black Caucus of State Legislators to do a resolution about emerging and innovative therapies for Medicaid to have access to those therapies. And the great thing about that is once it was ratified, that state resolution, so all the Black Caucus members that are part of NBCSL voted for that. And it also goes to the Congressional House, Senate, the president, as well as the vice president. So again, just trying to create awareness and education. So there's a lot of different things we've done, state proclamations with the local sickle cell organization to talk about and acknowledge World Sickle Cell Day, which happens June 19th, and then September being Sickle Cell Awareness Month. So all of these things, I think, will help build the story. So when it comes time for access, we're having these conversations, CRISPR and our government affairs team and our patient advocacy, along with the community, we're having these discussions right now. So so trying to prepare the environment.
Prepare the environment. Okay, that's deep. That's another area that we haven't really talked much about. And this is a question to Adrian, speaking of areas that we haven't talked a lot about. It is wonderful to see all of the therapies in the pipeline for sickle cell disease. This has not always been the case. There has been a shift in drug development for sickle cell disease and legislation. How is that being received by the patient community?
Well, I'm so thrilled that we have had the shift. And I think that we're having the shift because the powers that be are looking at, and rather than defining our disease, really looking at the disease to approach that pain. I'm also going to say that for a long time, I lobbied work for the new treatments, not understanding how hard it would be to fight to get those new treatments right into the hands of patients. So that's one of the things that Access works very hard on, is getting the current treatments in hand. And one of the things I do, speaking to what Sarah said about stories, is I tell the story of my daughter, who's this lovely, smart, sometimes too smart, from mom perspective. And she went to university, private schools, very privileged. I didn't think so, but I learned later that we are. At any rate, she graduated from university, started her own business, did really well, then sickle cell reared up. And for 10 years, she was an invalid. We spent close to 9 months out of the year in some sort of hospital settings. And then she got access to one of the new treatments. And their first year on that new treatment, she was only hospitalized maybe 3 weeks out of the year. Now she's gone 18 months without any hospitalization at all. Now that's transformative for her, but we did not realize as a family of 4 what that meant to the rest of us. That meant that we didn't always have to separate. That meant economically, what we were paying for people to sit and watch her breathe when we had to work, or what we, just on parking, just on the stress and strain of our lives, having to go down and make sure she was breathing every day. So I think when you say, what does it mean to our community, we can only go at this point story by story, because it hasn't been long enough for us to really trust it and get the access. But I know that we can tell you, as my daughter has reemerged and reclaimed her lives, what that means. And I can also tell you financially what that means. And I think that's a powerful story to anybody looking at the cost of these curatives. I know what 6 weeks in a hospital bed cost. $300,000 was nothing, We'd get these bills. I mean, that was, and so I think, I think all of it is going to happen, and we have to continue to work together to make it so that the people living with it now and those who are surrendering their bodies over for the trials, know we understand their sacrifice, and that people have access to the new treatment, so that maybe when it comes time, there'll be access to the curatives. And our whole narrative of this disease from generations, 5 generations, 100 years of babies crying and dying. We have the means of changing that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a heavy, it's wonderful, but it's still a heavy thing. But we need to talk about that too.
Well, thank you for sharing your personal story and your experiences with members in the community. And fortunately, coming towards the end of the program, we only have time for one last question. And this isn't directed to anyone specifically, but it asks, are there any lessons learned from the vaccine hesitancy we are seeing in Black communities to the COVID-19 vaccine that we can apply to when a sickle cell cure comes to market to help ensure patient uptake? Sarah or Bree, would you like to jump in?
Bree, you go first.
Bree, yeah.
One thing that was an issue, and I'm no expert in COVID vaccines, but I know that there was speculation in the Black community, partly because it wasn't clear what representation of Black individuals there was in the clinical trials. So people were concerned, even though the data looked good that led to the emergency use authorization of these vaccines. Black people said, well, was there anybody that looked like me in those trials? Were there anybody with my comorbidities, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, you name it? And so the benefit from the sickle cell related clinical trials that it's disease specific. But I just want to, and I'll let Sarah finish.
No, go ahead.
I just want to say that individuals with sickle cell disease, despite what some misgivings, biases there are by those in the majority, individuals with sickle cell disease are excited about clinical trials.
Right.
Was not one of my patients that said no to the COVID vaccine.
Right. That's right.
So I think that in some ways, and this is my opinion, I think that there are far more Black Americans willing to participate in clinical trials if just given the chance. And one thing we didn't talk about today with respect to equity and inclusion in clinical trials for sickle cell is that the physician is often the barrier, because the physician has to be the one to influence.
That's right. That's right.
And if the physician doesn't know about the trial or doesn't think that the patient in front of them is compliant enough or
deserving enough
support or whatever, they'll never get access. So sorry, I hope that was helpful.
No, you're right.
That was great.
Thank you.
I wish we had more time to go through. This has been such a great conversation. And I also would like to thank you for participating and being here. And if you would not mind taking this opportunity to enter your contact information into the chat section, or a way that we can view your website or anything to keep the conversation going, that would be great. I'll ask our guests to do that at this time. A growing number of gene therapies are expected to be developed and made available to patients and healthcare professionals. Improvement of patient access to gene therapies can only be achieved by understanding all the hurdles that we just discussed in a complete and integrated fashion, so that strategies are timely established to ensure gene therapy benefits are provided to patients and to the society. The significant benefits of gene therapies will not be realized unless patients have access to them. Again, thank you, Bree, Sarah, and Adrian, for sharing your insight and expertise. This has been extremely helpful discussion. for my family because of the sickle cell disease that we deal with generationally, as Adrian talked about. And I also like to thank everyone for attending and participating in this discussion. And thank you for Corellis for making shifts happen and bringing this program to us today. And for those interested, we have entered the contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out, click and do it now. Don't hesitate for one moment. You may not get a second chance to do that. Last but not least, if I don't see you sooner, I look forward to seeing you on April 13th for our MassBio program on innovation and access in mental health care. To register, please visit massbio.org/events, and you have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.